So the designated survivor is somebody that they select at, I don't want to say at random, but they have to pick somebody who's off of this presidential succession list. They don't know that they're going to be taken away until that day, and it's usually selected by the Secret Service or the Chief of Staff. They're never going to select any of these first four members because these first four are always involved in the State of the Union address. So there's the president and the vice president. Then there's the Speaker of the House. He is the majority leader in the House of Representatives, and or she, in this case it's a she right now. That person is always very prominent in the State of the Union address, so not going to pick that person. They're not going to pick the president pro tempore. This person is the Senate's equivalent to the Speaker of the House. So we'll talk about the Senate a little bit more in detail when we get to our unit on Congress, but the president pro temp is a very important position in the Senate and fourth in line in the presidential succession list. They will, however, begin selecting from these other members. Secretary of State. This is like state as in a nation state. So when we talked in the very beginning of the year about what is a state, we are talking about international relationships here. So Secretary of State is a person that is going to be dealing with other countries, specifically with any sort of conflict we may have or trying to maintain peace among other countries. That is our Secretary of State. Traditionally, Secretary of State has been one of the most important cabinet positions because more presidents have come out of the Secretary of State than any other Secretary cabinet position. That is probably why Hillary Clinton desired that position so badly and fulfilled it during Obama's presidency. She thought it'd be a stepping stone to her presidency, and it was very close to being that. Now, on this list, I do want you to have a general idea of what each of these secretaries are responsible to do. And so you should know the Secretary of State has international relations with other countries. It tries to maintain peace, or it tries to avoid conflict, or try to smooth out any sort of difficulties we may be having with other foreign dignitaries. Then we have the Secretary of the Treasury. Thank you to Alexander Hamilton, who got this started. The Secretary of the Treasury is pretty easy to understand this one because he's responsible for all of our financial organization. He's in charge of the national banking system. He's in charge of the federal banks, and so therefore he's going to play an important part. Secretary of Defense. This is generally a military leader, but it does not have to be. But this person's going to be in charge of defending our borders and defending our nation and going to be directing a lot of our military efforts. By the way, what did you catch in that video? Why is the order selected the way that it is? Dave?
Because that's when they were reinstated or reinstated.
Correct. They're the order in which they were created. And so these go from the oldest position up near the top down toward the newest position at the bottom. Number 8 on our list is the Attorney General. And each of these positions advise the president on a specific area of his presidency. There's no way in the world that you could do this job by yourself. You could not be an expert in all of these things. However, when you look at the debates and when you look at all of the candidates, they are expected to know stuff about each of these, but they have advisors even during their presidential campaigns that are trying to feed them information and help them understand what's happening. The Attorney General is the president's legal counsel as well as the nation's legal counsel. So this is like a lawyer who is going to be in charge of our judicial system and in charge of our reviewing legal practices to make sure that our government is operating under constitutional law properly. Now, the first 8 that I just showed you, I want you to know all 8 of these in the order in which you see them. So make a note, put a little line under number 8 if you need to. You need to know these first 8 in order. The likelihood of a designated survivor show happening in real life is possible, but not extremely likely. It is more likely that we would lose the first 3 or 4, and then I want you to know, okay, who's next? And in the event that something like that were to happen, it is not everybody moves up a spot. Instead, let's just say the first 4 are wiped out, so the Secretary of State takes over. The Secretary of State now becomes president, and he gets to appoint new people in these vacant spots. Because you're not going to take somebody who is in charge of our defense and put them as Secretary of Treasury. Yeah, right, that's a bad move. So you don't want to do that. The remaining elements on the presidential cabinet here, I want you to be familiar with, but I'm not going to require that you know them in order. So that way you are familiar with these. Secretary of Interior. This is not interior design of the White House. I know, some of you ladies are disappointed in that. Secretary of Interior is in charge of internal parks, internal infrastructure, is in charge of our National Park Service as part of that. Anything that is public land or government land would be part of the Secretary of Interior's job. I should not have to explain a whole lot about Secretary of Agriculture. I do want to name drop just for a moment. What?
How much are they getting paid?
I don't know what their salary is, but it's nice.
They work with
It's fair.
factories, right?
What? No. No. Housing and Urban Development. They intentionally selected somebody way down on the list, which agriculture is still down the list, but they intentionally did it far down the list to show the dramatic impact of that.
Yeah, how much would that person know about being a president?
Not much. And yes, Maddie's right. If you watch the show, it shows how little he knows, and he almost declines, but he does go ahead, otherwise there'd be no show. So, Secretary of Agriculture, I'm going to name drop for just a moment. My former governor is the Secretary of Agriculture right now, is Sonny Perdue. He's a really good guy. I've shaken his hand, and I know he goes to church faithfully, so I know he's a good Christian guy as well based on what he stands for. His assistant, so the second command there, was a graduate from Maranatha. My father-in-law knows him really well. Would say I'm an acquaintance of him, but I do have his phone number. He'll never answer it for me, but that's just a little name drop I want to throw out there. His name is Ken Barbick.
He's the what?
Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, and he's the one who I told you about where he said all these guys work ridiculous hours every week. And no, this is not the guy that Evan was talking about. Secretary of Commerce. This guy or girl is in charge of trade relationship among the states, trade among other nations as well. Anything that we are buying and selling, he would want to be an expert on, or commercial activity around the world. Secretary of Labor. This is our labor force. So he would definitely be monitoring the current GM workers' strike. Any of the labor union issues, he would be reporting to the president about any of those. Health and Human Services. Again, self-explanatory here. Our Obamacare legislation was heavily navigated through the HHS office, and when the first rollout of the Obamacare law happened, there were massive issues, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services actually got fired because she did not have the website ready, and she said it was ready, and it wasn't, and there were all kinds of problems, and Obama fired her. So they do have to not only report on stuff, but they have to do their job well. Housing and Urban Development. This is the one that Tom Kirkman from Designated Survivor was. And so their whole responsibility is to try to help improve urban development and housing and making sure that cities are providing good housing for people. Number 15 is Secretary of Transportation. Kind of wonder, do they provide a government-issued car for the Secretary of Transportation? Lifetime membership for Uber? They should. At least a gift card for one of those bird scooters, yeah. That'd be a great idea. Secretary of Energy is number 16. Oh, sorry. Let me go back here. Secretary of Energy, number 16. Oh, that didn't work. But energy is not that long. You can write down number 16 is energy. Number 17 is education. First eight you need to know in order. After this, after 8, I just want you to have an idea of what their role fulfills. A lot of them are self-explanatory. But if you have any question on it, yeah, you can ask. 19. Well, that's including the President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, and President Pro Tem. Here's the last of them. Veterans Affairs has gone under a lot of scrutiny over the last several years because a lot of veterans are not getting their medical benefits that the government's promised them, and so the secretary in charge of this has really done a lot of work to try to improve that. And some would say they've done a great job, others would say not enough. And then number 19 is our most recent. This was created in 2003 by George W. Bush. And a lot of people did not think we needed this and were kind of upset that George Bush decided to create it because they said, well, we have a Secretary of Defense. That's his job to protect us at home. And Bush said, well, we don't have anybody who is actively pursuing and targeting terrorists. That's not really in the military's description. So we need somebody who is protecting our home security through cyber attacks, through any sort of terrorism organization that's monitoring terrorism around the world. We're going to create a new secretarial position for Homeland Security, and that's their primary role. So any questions on presidential succession? Okay. Number 14, housing and urban development. Yep.